From a helpless child with big dreams to an absolute monster capable of destroying the entire world, these are all of Kafka's forms in Kaiju No. 8. And let's start with his childhood form. Kafka was born into a world that only knew the terror of monsters spawning every other weekend. Despite that, he grew up confident and generally carefree. He was never scared of taking risks and took charge whenever anything dangerous came up. Kafka was also an inspiration to the future captain of the 3rd Division of the Defense Force, Mina Ashiro. He took care of Mina not only because he was older than her, but also because their mothers were friends with each other. At the time, Kafka was a physically strong child who could easily take on any surrounding bullies. Although we didn't see much of him growing up, we do know Mina would vouch for his ability to handle himself and others around him. As a child, Kafka sported a baggy shirt, a pair of shorts, sandals, and a water gun that was always strapped around his back. Things were all normal, up until the point when a kaiju suddenly attacked their hometown, which led to the deaths of pretty much everyone Kafka cared for. Kafka and Mina were among the few survivors who managed to escape. Perched on a hill as they watched their town burn to the ground, Kafka and Mina promised each other that they'd one day join the Kaiju Defense Force and become the organization's top officers. Over the years, Kafka kept applying for the Defense Force, but failed every time, whereas Mina got accepted on her first try. This slowly killed off all of his confidence, and Kafka soon outgrew the maximum recruitment age. Left all alone, he lost his will to keep fighting, but still wanted to contribute to the Kaiju extermination effort. So, he then became a Kaiju corpse cleaner for Monster Sweeper, Inc. There are still 6 forms left to cover, and let's continue with adult Kafka. Kafka's work at Monster Sweeper, Inc. wasn't exactly glamorous, but it was essential. Day in and day out, he crawled into the stomachs of dead Kaiju, carving through muscle and bone with precision. Most people couldn't handle the smell or the psychological toll of seeing so many bodies, but Kafka got used to it. He knew the anatomy of monsters better than almost anyone in the country. It wasn't the job he wanted, but it gave him a skill set most soldiers lacked. During this time, his main outfit was a white hazmat-like suit that the company gave him in order to avoid getting corrosive kaiju guts on his body. Kafka had what some might describe as a sleeper build, since he didn't neglect his body over the years in case he somehow got into the Defense Force. In the time that followed, Kafka slowly started settling into his new life before he got stuck training a new part-time recruit named Leno Ichikawa. While out on their first job together, Kafka saved Leno's life from a Yoju and held it off until Leno came back to save him. Then they were both about to get eaten before Mina made an appearance and blasted the monster away. Even though Kafka got injured, he was surprisingly nimble for a man his age. He was able to fend off the monster on his own without wearing a battle suit, and was also capable enough to dodge some of the monster's attacks. Leno looked up to Kafka after that incident, admiring how casually he handled monster guts and crisis situations alike. Kafka, on the other hand, saw a younger version of himself in Leno, someone naive but full of potential. Their dynamic quickly shifted from mentor-student to brothers in arms. Leno's belief in Kafka would eventually be one of the biggest reasons Kafka kept pushing forward. And now, finally, let's move on to Kafka's Kaiju form. That same night, while at the hospital, Leno urged Kafka to apply for the Defense Force again since they raised the maximum age limit. However, suddenly, a small flying kaiju, which would later be named Kaiju No. 8, forces its way into Kafka's mouth and turns him into a humanoid kaiju. Despite having a comedic and playful personality, Kafka's kaiju form had a demonic appearance, with an insect-like skull for a face and bones exposed all over his dark body. His eyes turned completely black with green pupils in the middle. Not only that, this form of Kafka also gave him superhuman strength and heightened senses. He showed this when he accidentally destroyed an entire wall just by leaning against it. With his cover about to get blown, Kafka rushed out of the building, and Leno decided to tag along. The first thing Kafka did after turning into a kaiju was ignore his own safety and attempt to rescue a little girl nearby from another Yoju. His monster form was easily able to pulverize the beast, and this made Kafka remember his old promise to Mina. This triggered his ability to return to his human form once again. Despite his newfound powers, Kafka still had no shot at becoming a new Defense Force recruit because he couldn't bring out any of his combat abilities while in his human form. However, that didn't stop him, and he soon applied for the Defense Force again. Even though his bodysuit couldn't bring any extra power out of him, Kafka was still able enough to pass the physical tests. Instead of using his muscles to fight, Kafka made up for his lack of power by using his mind instead. With years of experience disposing of kaiju corpses, Kafka guided the troops and helped them secure kills. Everything seemed to be going great, up until a monster suddenly attacked Kafka and fractured some of his ribs. Despite being in pain, this form of Kafka still managed to limp through the entirety of the test. However, in the end, another humanoid kaiju made a sudden appearance and started attacking Hikaru, a girl who saved Kafka from the Yoju earlier. This turn of events forced Kafka to turn into his monstrous kaiju form. He had to do this since the creature that attacked them was significantly stronger than any of the new applicants in the training field. Kafka then got the chance to actually let loose and test out what this form is capable of. He immediately launched at the other kaiju and blew a hole straight through its body with a devastating punch. With the monster defeated, Kafka transformed back into a human and begged Hikaru to keep his identity a secret. Post-training Kafka. 2 months later, once Kafka was able to harness 1% of his suit's potential, he earned the right to train with 3rd Division's Vice Captain Soshiro Hoshina. Later, Kafka was the first person to respond to the kaiju that almost killed Hikaru during the training camp. There, Kafka, in his kaiju form, took off the other kaiju's head with a punch. However, that wasn't enough to keep the monster at bay. Despite getting back up, the humanoid kaiju was still a lot weaker compared to Kafka. Kafka not only overpowered him with his impressive strength, but he was also a lot faster. Kafka's last assault was even effective enough to completely expose the monster's core. But before he could deliver the killing blow, the defense force interrupted their battle and let the monster escape. Soon after, Kafka found himself face to face against the Vice Captain himself and finally met his match. Keeping up with Soshino is an impressive feat for this version of Kafka, since Soshino is capable of going toe-to-toe against some of the strongest monsters in the show. Despite being stronger than him, Kafka still lost the battle, but managed to escape with his life since he held off on delivering the killing blow against his Vice Captain. Later on, Hoshina didn't go easy on Kafka, not even once. Every session they had together was brutal. Kafka would get tossed across the training room, buried under simulated kaiju attacks, and pushed to the edge of collapse. But all of that was necessary if Kafka wanted to get stronger. He wasn't just learning to fight better, he was learning to control himself. Every punch was about precision. Every dodge was about timing. Hoshina was shaping Kafka into a calculated warrior, not a mindless weapon. Sometime later, as he kept up his training while his fellow officers were recovering in the hospital, Kafka was forced to handle yet another life-threatening battle when the kaijus decided to invade Tashikawa base. As monsters descended from the sky, Kafka tried to keep his promise and hold off on transforming for as long as he could so he wouldn't give up his identity. However, when the situation got tough, Kafka had no choice but to transform and take out a giant Yoju bomb all by himself in order to save everyone inside the base. Following this event, he was immediately arrested and taken to the Defense Force headquarters. It's worth noting just how much mental pressure Kafka was under during this time. Holding back his transformation while dozens of lives hung in the balance isn't something a normal person could do. His self-control was ridiculous, considering most people in his position would have panicked and given in long ago. Kafka knew that revealing his secret could mean execution, and yet the idea of letting people die while he stood back wasn't an option. Berserk Kafka. Given one chance to prove himself, Kafka had no choice but to face off against the Director General of the Defense Force, Isao Shinomiya. It didn't help that before the fight, Kafka had a vial of his blood stolen and basically lost a leg the second he tried to strike back. This sense of dread and insecurity put Kafka in a state of hysteria, where he lost complete control of his body. In this hazy state, Kafka's soul was forced to watch himself attack and, surprisingly, keep up with an Isao armed with Kaiju No. 2's gauntlets. As soon as Kaiju No. 8 started taking hold of Kafka's body completely, Kafka tried to resist the urge to kill Isao before losing control once again. Determined to take his body back from the monster, Kafka punched himself in the heart and made himself collapse immediately after. In this form, Kafka's attacks are completely primal and his speed is beyond impressive. However, what made this berserk version of Kafka so terrifying wasn't just his strength, it was also the unpredictability. His movements didn't hold a pattern. They were controlled by instinct and rage alone. The scariest part wasn't that Kafka could overpower Isao for a few seconds, it was that he almost didn't want to stop. Following this fight, Kafka spent the next 5 days knocked out cold, before finding himself paired up with the 1st Division Captain, Gen Narumi. Before we cover Kafka's absolute strongest form in the entire story, let's first quickly cover the 1st Division Kafka. On their first mission together, Kafka took on some ant monsters with the rest of the 1st Division before finding out that he was completely unable to transform. With Hikaru keeping him safe, Kafka came face to face with Kaiju No. 9. Fearing that he would lose control again and potentially harm his friends was what held him back, and Kafka had to overcome his demons if he wanted to transform again. Before long, Kaiju No. 9 retreated and went after his real target, Isao Shinomiya. With Kikoru's dad in immediate danger, Kafka rushed for the Defense Force headquarters but failed to make it there in time. When he finally saw 𝐿𝐸 again, he had already been absorbed by Kaiju number 9. Despite the power-up, Kafka held his own against the monster fairly well, thanks to Kikoru's help. But eventually, number 9 succeeded in escaping. The fight left Kafka feeling incredibly sour about the incident. However, even more bad news came when he was informed that he might not be able to transform back into a human if he kept using Kaiju number 8's abilities. Despite the risks involved, Kafka decided to keep fighting with the 1st Division's captain's blessing. Soon after, Kafka's 3rd Division teammates visit the base for an anti-number 9 Eastern Divisional Conference. Having grown a lot since then, Kafka winds up having a friendly bout with 𝐸𝐸 at the Ryūne Shrine, but still loses because of 2 simple things. According to 𝐸𝐸, Kafka is too reliant and overconfident about Kaiju number 8's abilities, which winds up making him fight sloppy. The second point 𝐸𝐸 made was for Kafka to work on his footwork and speed. Basically, he wanted Kafka to train his legs more. That loss against 𝐸𝐸 was a turning point for Kafka. For the first time since gaining his powers, he started seriously thinking about what it meant to fight as a human again. And from that moment on, he stopped trying to rely on brute force and started training like regular people who didn't have kaiju powers. After their casual spar, Kafka trained on his own for a while, on top of the training he did with Kikoru and the people from both units. After 3 whole months of training with 𝐸𝐸, Kafka was able to perform better on the battlefield as a human, and even started depending less on the people around him. For most of the battle, he focused on not using his monster abilities. Eventually, things got a bit too dicey for Kafka to just stay still, and he finally transformed when the 1st unit's main base was attacked. Despite going up against Kaiju number 13 on his own, Kafka managed to kill it off with a single punch and saved his platoon leader's life. This was an extremely impressive feat for Kafka, which showcased just how much his strength had grown since he started working on himself. He also learned the squadron-style combat technique and the hand-to-hand combat techniques of the Hoshino family. With that, he had 4 different attacks he could now use, called Force Blast, Twin Blast, and Rising Blast. As soon as the tides of the battle with Kaiju number 9's monsters began to shift, Kafka was forced to transform yet again in order to save Mina. And even though Kafka would have done anything to not repeat what happened with 𝐸𝐸, his hands were tied dealing with all the distractions number 9 set up for him. With no options left, Kafka watched number 9 take Mina hostage and start to absorb her. Mocked for his inability to act, Kafka was left feeling hopeless until his friend Leno decided to swoop in to take some of the burden off Kafka's shoulders. Trusting Leno to protect everyone else, Kafka dove into the fray with Kaiju number 9 and ripped Mina right out of his clutches. With a steel resolve, Kafka and number 9 confronted each other and clashed fists, which created huge shockwaves. Somehow on par with the overpowered Kaiju number 9, Kafka began using his squadron-style combat technique, but couldn't do anything significant. Despite this, even number 9 acknowledged Kafka's sudden growth and how strong he had gotten because of his training. Even though Kafka's punches sent shockwaves through number 9's body that were strong enough to blow a hole through a building behind him, number 9 still managed to dodge and defend everything without breaking a sweat, thanks to 𝐸𝐸's memories. Realizing his weakness, Kafka remembered how he learned the Hoshino family's hand-to-hand combat style. So he prepared the Twin Blast as usual, but at the last moment, he fired off an alternate version of the move, which sent number 9 flying back. With its chest blown off and its core exposed, Kafka was almost ready to celebrate his victory before he realized the monster had managed to shield its core somehow. Number 9 then immediately shot a beam at Kafka before suddenly appearing behind him, looking even stronger than before. Kafka took a thorough beating since he was so overwhelmed by his adversary's true strength. Eventually, number 9 evolved into an even stronger 2-headed monster thanks to the weapons he absorbed from 𝐸𝐸. Facing the combined might of Kaiju number 9 and Kaiju number 2, Kafka lost his leg during the battle. Still, he managed to come up with a new attack, the new Lotus Blast. Responding to the monster's freaky ability to keep evolving, Kafka kept coming up with new ways to attack and further piqued number 9's interest. But before long, the monster got bored and pummeled Kafka with its own new technique, God of Thunder. This attack completely exposed Kafka's core and it was almost ripped out of his body, but Mina intervened at just the right time to save him. A quick chat with Mina helped Kafka regain his confidence, but the pair weren't powerful enough to fight a being that was a collection of every monster humanity ever faced. That's when Kafka decided to play his trump card and finally let Kaiju number 8 take full control of his body. All out Kafka, with his kaiju body undergoing a mountain of mental strain thanks to Kafka's recent training from Narumi. The monster began howling in pain and showed off a completely new berserker look. With his newfound strength, Kafka regained control of his berserk state and used it to finally subdue Kaiju number 9. With a final push, and with some help from 𝐂𝐸's lingering consciousness that lived inside Kaiju number 9's body, Kafka delivered an alternate version of God of Thunder in order to completely shatter his enemy's core. But that wasn't the end. During that exchange, Kafka got pulled into number 9's psyche and began viewing the time when all of this kaiju business actually began. As the ground begins to crumble underneath them, number 9 finally transforms into his true form, a beast meant for pure destruction. Meanwhile, in the real world, Kafka's core was completely destroyed. With his consciousness mostly gone, Kafka's inner kaiju willed his body into punching number 9's corpse, but it was sent flying back with its arms severed. With Kafka presumed dead, Soshiro, Mina, and Narumi were the only ones left to stand up to this ultimate menace. While the fight went on, Kafka found himself drifting deeper into his own subconscious until he came across a samurai from the past. Becoming a part of the samurai's battalion during their historic fight against the first kaiju ever recorded in human history, Kafka learned the true origins of Kaiju number 8. Determined to return to the battlefield and save humanity, Kafka converted his human heart into a kaiju core by his own choice. His lifeless body then suddenly sprang into action and managed to save Captain Narumi right before he received the killing blow. This new, energized Kafka stood tall and tanked a fatal injury that even exposed his core without worrying at all about it. And soon after, his charcoal skin started crumbling into dust, leaving behind a white armored body that looked far scarier than his old kaiju form. In this form, his bones are more pronounced, his jaw grows even larger, and his skull transforms into 2 scaly horns with eyes on them. This white armored Kafka didn't just look terrifying, he literally radiated final boss energy. With Kaiju number 8's true form unlocked, Kafka was officially the strongest being in the story. He tanked a direct hit to his face like it was nothing, and then punched number 9 back several meters. It was obvious that the fight quickly became one-sided in Kafka's favor. With no way to win, Kaiju number 9 began launching a beam, but Kafka suddenly appeared behind it and stopped it with blinding speed. He then pummeled number 9's body until the Meriki Mega Monster ejected itself out of the dead Kaiju's body. Despite dodging attacks that could easily tear down skyscrapers, Kafka still winded up losing his head to the Mega Monster's attacks. Even though all of his attacks were getting parried, Kafka got the help he needed thanks to Kikoro using Kaiju number 1's clairvoyance ability. Together, the pair kept the Mega Monster busy until Mina charged up her weapon and took a devastating sniper shot that finally exposed the monster's core. Ready to attack the core, Kafka prepared an all-out punch that completely annihilated it. This final form of Kafka was far beyond anything we'd seen before in the story. No kaiju or human up to this point could match the raw power of this monstrous transformation, which makes this Kafka's ultimate final form in the show.